Okay, welcome back to MENSCHlife. We have with us Adir Dishi. Welcome, Adir. Great to have you with us. And Josee Chiasson. Did I pronounce that right? Okay, not bad, eh? Okay, welcome both. We appreciate you being with us. So, Adir, you're with an organization called Hasbara at York University. Want to tell us a little bit about the organization first?
Hasbara is a student group that was started up around 4 or 5 years ago at York. There's a bunch of Israel advocacy groups under different names at the universities around North America and I guess in Europe. Hasbara does grassroots, it's a grassroots Israel organization. We do political advocacy, Israel advocacy, and we try to reach out to the greater York community, faculty, students.
Hasbara is a Hebrew word.
Yes.
What exactly does it mean?
So Hasbara means to explain. Hasbir is to explain.
Okay.
So that's what we try to do is, I guess, explain the situation because Israel has a bad rap, you could say, in the international community.
Right. Okay, and Josee, you're with an organization that is huge in the U.S.,
yes.
Not as big in Canada. You represent CUFI on campus, which stands for Christians United for Israel. How did you get involved with the group?
So the group started last year. And really the main involvement last year was during Israel Apartheid Week. So I found out about it actually through tabling. And so I got involved, just started learning as much as I could about Israel advocacy.
Tabling is
when you're in the main area in Berry Hall, the school allows you to raise awareness about your club or different issues that you're promoting.
Right.
So it's basically like one main space. So there was a table set up with the CUFI banner. So I found out about it that way. It was the first year that they had the club, and so this year I was president, and so we've just been working on growing the club. Our focus is reaching out to the Christian community to educate them about standing with Israel and also supporting the Jewish community in their initiatives on campus.
Right. Well, I know it's an incredible community because when I was down in the States a few years ago, I went to a CUFI meeting in Washington. And it was incredible to see that kind of support from the Christian community. We want to talk about, let's start with this Israel Apartheid Week, because this, to me, is a cancer. And it just keeps going on year after year. Adir, what do you see on campus at York and your general views on this Israel Apartheid Week?
Israel Apartheid Week was founded actually at University of Toronto. So it's homegrown in Toronto. So I think 7 or 8 years ago, and it's grown exponentially since. You have it at so many different university campuses around the world, especially along the West Coast in the States, and York and U of T are hotspots, as well as different campuses in Europe. Israel Apartheid Week is it has nothing to do with criticizing Israel or raising awareness about the issue of the Palestinians. Is there solely to demonize Israel and by extension the Jewish people. That's really its sole purpose. There's nothing pro-Palestinian about it, I don't think. A lot of pro-Palestinian advocates have actually adopted the name anti-Israel. They won't say anti-Israel advocates, but they'll talk about the anti-Israel movement themselves. They don't even call it pro-Palestinian anymore. Because there's hardly any fundraisers you find for a hospital or a school in the West Bank or bake sales or anything like that. They're solely to demonize the country as a whole. They hold it to ridiculous standards, and they say they call Israel the biggest cancer in the world and the greatest violator of human rights, etc. So I'm sure you've heard all the rhetoric.
Yeah, unfortunately we have. And do you think it's this Israel Apartheid Week, is it getting worse, or is it starting to settle down a little bit?
I think like anything else in the world, it has its booms and its busts. So a lot depends on the situation in the Middle East. If there's a war or if there's I don't know, some confrontation, it'll be reflected on campuses. But I think just like we saw before with mortgages, it has kind of like an increasing value of hostility. Year after year, even if 1 year might be greater than the previous one or lesser than the previous one, every year it's kind of a growing movement, and it's a threat that we should all take very seriously. And it's growing to be more and more hostile not only against Israel, but against, as you know, Jews or anybody that supports kind of Western values and the things that we hold so dear.
Right. Josee, what's your perception of what's going on at Israel Apartheid Week? Is it a movement that is gaining in strength, or are things quieting down from your perspective?
From my perspective at York, I would definitely say that the Israel Apartheid Week itself is under control from where it's been 5 or 6 years ago and where it is today. There really isn't a loud voice during Israel Apartheid Week from anti-Israel advocates. I think that generally speaking on other campuses as well, it's a minority of students who are engaging in these activities, but their methods of engaging are so loud that they gain a lot of attention because they're interrupting meetings, they're having protests, they're doing activities that would gain media attention. And so you hear about it all the time, and also we're paying a lot of attention to it. But as far as York University goes, I think that the administration has really taken a proactive stance during Israel Apartheid Week, partly because they're very concerned with the reputation of the school. It's not good when you have media report about anti-Semitism on campus, or Jewish students being locked in their office and having to be escorted by police because there's people rioting outside. So I think the university has really taken this very seriously. They've increased the amount of communication they have with student leaders. They've increased the police presence. They've started a human rights campaign about respectful dialogue. So they've really, I think, done a very good job at keeping it under control. Of course, the underlying issues between students still exist, and I think those need to be countered. But as far as Israel Apartheid Week at York University campus, it's really not a big deal anymore. Okay, so we're gonna talk about that because I want to delve into that subject about the administration itself, because earlier, well, actually late in 2010, there was this incident where George Galloway, who's a well-known Israel hater, was allowed to speak on campus, and then there was a local rabbi who was, who published the fact that that this was going on, and then he ended up getting threatened, legal action taken against him if he didn't revoke some of the things that he said. And that also looked very bad on the administration. So we're going to explore that a little further, and we'll also have a chance to take your calls. We will ask you to call in a little bit later. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, we are back here on MENSCHlife. We're speaking with Adir Dishi and Josee Chiasson. Welcome back. So we're talking about Israel Apartheid Week, and recently George Galloway, who is known as a real Israel basher, came to speak on campus. And it seemed rather unfair because there's been a number of events, like Daniel Pipes, who is a supporter of Israel, but he's fairly moderate in his views of Islam and so on, but he was completely shut down, whereas people like George Galloway are allowed to speak. Adir, let me start with you. Do you see something very strange going on campus there?
I don't think this is new. It's happened for years where kind of like the left has held this monopoly of free speech on campus. You know, they cry, censorship or whatever when they have their speakers that aren't that don't get the right, I don't know, viewing time or whatever. But when you have something like Daniel Pipes or even somebody more moderate, they'll shut him down right away. I think any student group has the right to bring whoever they want to campus. We weren't protesting George Galloway as necessarily being there. He, as vile of a human being as he is, supporting Hamas monetarily and unashamed about it, saying this isn't charity, this is politics on camera. He's very proud of that. Our problem was the fact that the student government paid him to come, or paid for the cops to come, or whoever. They invited him and they were sponsoring him. And our student funds we're forced to pay into that union. We're forced to pay into that student union, the York Federation of Students. And they took the money and they brought in probably the most controversial speaker that you could think of. We were very disappointed that the university didn't say anything about it. they don't necessarily have to shut him down, but they could come out with a written statement saying this isn't helping, the Israel-Palestinian or Israeli-Arab situation on campus. You're just, feeding the fire, or, we condemn. They could have said something. I know that there was a professor at McGill, or a vice president of students at McGill, when she was asked to cut ties with Hebrew University as part of the anti-Israel BDS, or Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions campaign. When she was asked to cut ties with Israel, she issued a response, and it was published in the McGill newspaper, basically saying, what are you talking about? The whole idea of academia is that we should have a free flow of ideas. Who are you to boycott a university solely based on your political beliefs? It's like you're a disgrace to this university. And that's kind of what we were expecting from the administration, but we didn't get it.
And is there a lack of fairness? Like, from what I understand, perhaps it was the last academic year when Daniel Pipes was supposed to come, or maybe it was earlier this year. I don't remember.
It was a number of years ago.
And last year as well.
Yeah, there was an event where he was supposed to come as part of a B'nai B'rith
by
thing.
video screen.
Yeah.
And then what happened was they were told that they would have to, like close to the end, they would have to come up with a certain amount of money to cover the security costs because they were afraid, and the organization, whether it was B'nai B'rith students or whoever, just didn't have the funds. So the event either got canceled or just ended up being a small thing. So, how is Josee, what do you see, the administration, how are they dealing with all this?
Right, so I think the biggest difference regarding the Galloway event and the Daniel Pipes event is that the student government was sponsoring the Galloway event. That's a big factor because the student government has a lot of influence on campus, and I think the dynamics between the student government and the administration is kind of like they don't really associate. The student government kind of just does what they can, like whatever they want, and the administration doesn't have a lot of influence on them. Right. So I think there's that distinction is important, but as far as the Daniel Pipes event, it was student groups wanting to bring Daniel Pipes. So the student government has a bunch of resources, so they were able to pay for security to have this event. And therefore, the administration is like, yeah, okay, you have the money to do it, do it. Versus student groups who had to follow those same rules about paying for security didn't have the funds to do it, and so there was no way that they could bring Daniel Pipes on campus. So in that sense, where the resources are, there's a big discrepancy between student groups and student government. And student governments, in my opinion, and probably in a lot of other students' opinion, is they're elected to represent all students. So that's where the biggest problem is, in my perspective, is that the student government was not representing all students. They chose to bring one side of the most divisive issue on campus,
right,
and without representing the other side. And I actually had the opportunity to talk to members of the student government and explain this to them that, hey, like it would be really nice if you used our student resources to also educate the people about the other side on this issue. And their response was, what, you would rather, would you rather us bring like Netanyahu or something, sarcastically? And I was like, hey, why not, But they're like that would ever happen. No, it wouldn't.
Well, Israeli speakers who are in support of Israel have been canceled all over the place several times. Right. And of course, there was an incident, I think, at Concordia a few years ago where Netanyahu was actually canceled. But the student government represents the students. So how do they get into power? Is this because an overwhelming number of students are anti-Israel? I mean,
I think there are a fair amount of students that are very anti-Israel on campus, but we have to remember that, I don't know, maybe 10% of the student population votes. People are very, especially at York. At York, there's a very hostile minority, but it's a commuter school. It's not it's something like maybe only 5% of the students live on campus. Most people go there because they want to get a degree and they want to get out. They don't want to get involved with student politics. There is a very vocal minority that does, but most of them kind of want to get in, want to get out, and that's why you have this 10% voter rate. Just to go back to the security issues, there's a rule at York University which it's one thing that both the Jewish groups and the anti-Israel groups agree on, is that we don't like the fact that student groups bear the cost of security. So let's say I wanted to bring in Netanyahu, if Netanyahu decided to come to York University. he would, I don't know, his security costs would whatever be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. That would be borne by the student group. So that would be expected of those bringing him. So it's basically like you have to pay for your free speech at the university. You have to pay if you want, you know, a certain opinion to be heard, which we both agree is wrong. This past year, we had the showing of Uranium, which is a documentary about Iran and its nuclear aspirations. And we had a campaign the week before leading up to it, you know, highlighting some of Iran's human rights violations. We even had an Iranian group co-sponsor it that was very supportive. There are some other Iranian groups on campus, though, that were more than critical. And there was something like 12 or 13 police officers that had to be just at the showing of a documentary. Obviously, we cut a deal with the university. We can't pay for 12 or 13 police officers because each one is like $300, $400, $500 an hour. But we were able to raise. We paid for 2 or 3. We were able to raise the funds in time. It took us about 2 or 3 days. We reached out to the community, and people were very adamant that the documentary should be shown. So thank God we got that. We still got that shown, and we raised the funds for the security. But I think it's a bad policy of the university that we have to pay for our freedom of speech.
Yeah. There's a video that is well known. This was an event. This incident happened in the prior academic year, and it had to do with the overthrowing of the student government because this student government was supporting this strike that was going on for months in the middle of a school year. And as a result, a number of students got together, and they, I guess, they got 5,000 signatures. So they were able to overthrow this government, and then all hell broke loose. And there was a very well publicized incident where students had to run for cover, and they were hiding in the Hillel building, and the police had to come and escort them off campus. And we actually have a video of some of that, which we're going to watch after this break, and we're also going to welcome your calls. After that, we'd like to hear from you if you have calls, comments, or questions for Adir or Josee. So hang in there. We will be back in just a moment. Okay, so that video there gives you a sense of the intimidation and the anti-Semitism. It was called for what it is. Some people argue it's, we're just, we're not anti-Semitic. But on that particular evening, there were students, or at least one student who was actually charged, and they were swearing, "You effing Jews," and this and that. Adir, what went on that night?
I mean, I wasn't at the university at that time, so. But I've heard a lot of accounts of it. Something like this doesn't happen every day. It doesn't necessarily happen every year. But the fact that it happens at all, And all the people in that video, I mean, Josee and I probably recognize, they're the typical perpetrators on campus. Basically, you had there was a student government, and they were supporting the strike, and which made a lot of students angry because you're paying, your funds are basically going down the toilet because of the student government. And so there were a group of students that got together, and I think you need 5,000 signatures to hold for a referendum to drop the student government. And they got the 5,000 signatures, and I'm not sure exactly what happened after that, but this was also at the time of the war in Gaza in 2008. And they were all the typical characters in that crowd, and they went crazy. And you saw the chanting, you saw the intimidation at the beginning, yelling at people and not letting people pass. Things like that do happen on campus.
Still?
I know I get looks from a bunch of people all the time. Clearly I identify as a Jew.
Because you're wearing a kippah?
Yeah.
Because do they know who you are?
I think they know. I wear a kippah, so I think it's easy to point me out. But there are a group of students that they'll give you looks, and they'll make sly comments or swear at you in languages other than English. It's typical. I don't think it happens to every Jew on campus, but those that do want to speak out on behalf of Israel or do want to stand up for the things that they believe in, they do get this kind of treatment.
Okay, we want to mention that the phone lines are open, and the phone number to call in is 416-665-7500. We do want to hear from you if you have any questions or comments. We are talking with Dear Dishi, who is the immediate past president of Hasbara at York University, and also Josee Chiasson, who's the immediate past president of Christians United for Israel. Adir, you recently wrote an article submitted to the Canadian Jewish News that the kind of support that Jewish students need on campus is not the support that what you're getting from the community, what you're getting from groups like CJC or whoever, is not what you need. What do you need?
So I don't want to turn this into a mudslinging competition between the groups, but I think in the past year, I think they have picked it up a little bit. But overall, the general attitude of how to do Israel advocacy at York is not good. I think it's wrong. I think there needs to be. I think we have to recognize the threat that the anti-Israel groups play. I think it's something that's been around for 30 plus years. That started after the Yom Kippur War, a couple years after that, when the Arab League passed a resolution at the UN labeling Zionism as racism. And it was repealed a couple years later, but I think that was really the kickoff, the starting point to this political war against Israel. And we're seeing the fruits of that labor today on campuses. We have to recognize that the threat does exist, and we have to approach it. And something that Jews love to do is kvetch. We love to complain about things, and we'll stick on the word apartheid, and we'll say, oh, it's not apartheid, but we fail in being proactive. And I think what the Jewish community and Jewish students on campus need to do is be proactive in their messaging and never respond. I don't care if they label it Israel Apartheid Week or Israel Genocide Week or whatever whatever name that they come up with. It's irrelevant, because we need to do our own advocacy. We need to talk about the issues, because the facts are on our side. We need to talk about issues like settlements and refugees and excessive force and things that we shouldn't tread away from that. We should talk about the issues, and we should be strong in our messaging. We should put forward our message. For example, Hasbara ran a campaign this year called Our Jerusalem. We're calling for a unified Jerusalem. So it could be considered a little bit controversial, but I think most Jews would agree to a unified Jerusalem. I think we should also tailor the message to the audience that we're at. So a lot of people think, if only the world read Startup Nation, then all of the anti-Israel rhetoric would go away. The view that a lot of people have of Israel on campus is one of the worst violators of human rights in the world. So imagine they look at Israel as like we look at Iran or Saudi Arabia. And if I told you that Iran and Saudi Arabia came out with a Pentium chip, I don't think you're going to care that much. No. I think, especially in universities and left-wing universities like York, where human rights are very hot, you need to tailor that message and show how Israel is the only supporter of human rights in the region. And I mean, it's so easy to see it today, and it shows how hypocritical the anti-Israel movement is today with all the riots going on in the Middle East. And that's the kind of message that we should be pushing. And I think it has to go on year-round. It can't just be done during Israel Apartheid Week. It should be, and that's what Hezbollah does. We really do try to table every couple weeks, and we run different campaigns and spread certain messages.
Right. Well, I think that running a campaign on a unified Jerusalem may help to educate some of the Jewish students, but I don't think it's going to win us any friends, especially on campus.
People are very apathetic. I mean, people talk about the 5%, and the 90% in the middle. Right? You have the 5% that's pro-Israel that are not going to change, the 5% that are anti-Israel they're not going to change, and the 90% that you should convince. The 9% almost don't exist. I mean, I've tabled a lot this year, and people really don't care. Unless they do care, they don't.
They don't care about this campaign for a unified
Jerusalem? They don't care about, in general, the conflict. I mean, it's such a polarizing conflict that's in the news every single day for the past 60 years. People that don't want to get their hands dirty don't get them. I think that what Jewish students and Jewish groups or pro-Israel groups need to do is build stronger relationships with their natural allies. So the pro-Western groups on campus, or Christians United for Israel, or like the campus conservatives, or even the liberals on campus, which we have good relationships with all of them, and you need to kind of strengthen those relationships. And also, I mean, it's sad to say, but people say that there's 5,000 Jews that go to York University. I think that number's a little inflated, but even if we say that there's a lot of Jews, not that many Jews come out and help with campaigns. A lot of Jews are very ignorant about the facts surrounding Israel. So I think a call for a unified Jerusalem definitely helps our 5%, if you wish, or the Jewish students on campus that they feel a sense of pride when they see something like that.
Right. Okay, but if we're talking about human rights, which I think is important, because that's totally out of scope, right? I mean, Israel's criticized for being violators of human rights, and as you say, Israel is, I think, a very strong supporter of human rights. And if you look at the gays, whether it's, wherever in Israel, you see that you're allowed to do whatever you want. Now, you guys may, I assume you're both fairly on the right side of the spectrum in both your views. So I don't know how you feel about that, but, we see what's going on in Toronto with Queers Against Israel Apartheid. I mean, that's, I think a great opportunity for education. It seems to me that how many, gays from all over the Middle East go to Israel because that's a place where they can do whatever they want and they won't be killed for it or hung for it.
I mean, the Queers Against Israeli Apartheid, they're a group that it's totally antithetical, or it's totally ridiculous. Their whole premise. We give them way too much attention. It's a very small group of people. They, just because they're it's so ridiculous, the things that they're saying, we jump on it, and that's what we complain about. I mean, we should be proactive in our messaging. We shouldn't give them attention, but rather, spread our message, which is that Tel Aviv is the gay capital of the Middle East. Right.
But they're going to take down the entire Pride now as a result of.
They backed out, or.
I don't know. We're going to hear from Martin Gladstone, who's an outspoken, leader in the Jewish community involved in gay pride and what have you. I think they were trying to take it down because Pride was supporting. They had a rally against TD Bank because TD was an advertiser and a supporter of gay pride, and they're trying to take it down. So. But listen, things are constantly changing. Anti-Semitism, from my point of view, is not something we see in everyday life anymore. It seems like it's on campus. It's just such a hot thing. And as you said earlier, dear, Israel Apartheid Week started here in Toronto, and I want to get your ideas on why you think that is. Is there something unique about Toronto? But we'll talk about that after the break. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick with us. And on MENSCHlife, we actually have a caller. Okay, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, I'm just wondering what Adir and Josee suggest that the community do to encourage Israel advocacy on campus.
Okay, thanks for your question. Who wants to take the first shot at that? Josee.
Okay, so I think one of the biggest things from my perspective is education, especially coming from a Christian background. Not a lot of Christians understand the necessity and the urgency of standing with Israel, but a lot of people understand that it's important. But they just don't know a lot about it. They're intimidated by the politics behind it. They're intimidated by all the media hype and whatnot. So I think one really important aspect is bringing it to a level where it's not intimidating. You just break it down step by step. This is what happened in the past, historically. If you want to bring a religious aspect to it, I don't know if you're a Christian or not, but I know for reaching out to the Christian community, that's very important to bring out as well. So just bringing it down. So because it's so intimidating and there's so much hype about it, bringing it down to a level that's understandable for everybody, reaching it, looking at it from all different aspects, through media bias, looking at it from politics, looking at it from history, different, just to gain a better understanding of the whole issue. I think that gives people a lot more confidence when approaching the issue, and it sort of gets rid of that apathy. Because I think a lot of the apathy comes from that the fact that it's such a big issue that nobody's really broken down into tangible pieces.
Okay, before the break, I was asking you guys if you could comment on why you think the Israel apartheid movement, or whatever you want to call it, it's such a terrible name, why Toronto?
Something that I didn't really buy into until this past year is this growing kind of Islamist threat. And I mean, I read a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about it, and I didn't. I thought it was just a lot of talk. I didn't really think it to be that true. A lot of people have seen things like PalestinianMediaWatch.com or Memory TV, and these are organizations that basically translate. They translate Arab and Iranian TV.
Right.
And if you look at it only for a couple minutes, you'll see the vile anti-Semitism that is broadcasted every single day in the Arab Muslim world.
Yes.
And it ranges from the traditional, Jews control the banks, and they control the media.
Jews are apes, pigs.
Yeah,
I mean,
to the Holocaust didn't happen. To whatever you like.
Right.
And obviously Israel and Jews are used interchangeably. It's not they don't separate Israelis and Jews. There's a huge immigrant population in Toronto, and I see most of the anti-Semitism that I've seen on campus comes from Muslim Arabs. They come from, and these are ideas I think have been driven into them. Recent immigrants who you could see their English isn't that good. They say things that are so shocking, so you wouldn't believe the things that we've heard.
That you hear, like what?
So we started a conversation once. I was talking to a guy, and he's like, and it was completely devoid of of the topic. And he said, just before we talk, I just want to let you know that I don't think the Holocaust happened. So I just want to let you know that. And I was saying, with my mouth open, like I don't even know what to say to that. Things like, well, how do you guys pay for all this? How do you guys pay for all the cops around here? You guys are pretty rich. And so,
they ask you how you pay for all the cops.
We didn't pay for the cops, but
right.
But things like, well, I mean, the Jews control the media. It's a given. Things that are just things that they hear and they feel, they just think it's true. They think it's true, and we see that portrayed today. It's not like if you hear these ideas or see these programs, growing up, you're just going to drop the ideas altogether. And I also think that's the biggest obstacle to peace in the Israeli-Arab conflict, is that you're educating your children to be martyrs, and you're educating your children to be,
right.
shahidim, and go out and Jewish blood is whatever.
Okay, so that would explain, because there is a very big immigrant population in Toronto. I think close to 50% of Torontonians are from originally not from Toronto. But there's this reinforcement that's happening through the faculty. There's so many professors. Would you not agree, Josee? Is that part of the problem?
In my program, I haven't encountered professors, but I have heard. I think one of the things, playing off of what Adir just said, is that these stereotypes are never challenged. When immigrants come, generally speaking, they sort of stay together with their own ethnic groups. or religious groups, or like, whatever they identify with, which is fine. But at the same time, I've had friends who are from an Arab background who I've befriended, and as they find out more about me, I introduce them to my Jewish friends, and they see how kind they are. It breaks those stereotypes.
Right.
And so I've actually had people call me and say, hey, like, I used to hate Jews, I used to hate Christians, and not really understand why.
Right.
And as they encounter people of these backgrounds, they start to see that a lot of the things they believe are not true.
Okay.
And so I think that's a big part of it, is like exposing people to each other.
Are there enough events on campus that try and bring people together so that they will have the opportunity to see that, Jews are not apes and monkeys as they may have been taught when growing up, from Saudi Arabia or wherever? Is there enough of that going on?
There's a fair amount. I think the best way to kind of bridge the gaps is just through interactions during tabling or very hall, in very hall or in your classrooms or something like that. I think when it takes an official stance, it kind of loses its appeal, because you feel that everybody's putting on a show. But when you get to know the real, gist of a person, you get to know them, and you're studying economics just like I'm studying economics. Well, you're not an ape and a pig.
Right.
Something that I wanted to comment on just regarding the question for the caller, something that the community can do. I think the most important thing is to look at our values as a Jewish community, and starting with the household, and see where we put our value in Israel, and because I know that my grandparents were born in Egypt and Lebanon, and so I mean they were kicked out of their homes basically and settled in Israel. So I mean their value is they know where they are. But the growing, my generation, we're kind of removed. Israel's there as a given. We know it's there, and they don't realize that it's still fighting for its existence. I think that the big organizations like the UJA or whoever should increase trips to Israel for the schools like Chat or Char or Chaim or whatever the school, and build a greater connection and educate about the threat that's happening on campus. When we put more focus on building the connection to Israel and the value that we have with it, the value of the state, we'll be more willing to stand up for the state, and that's really what's needed, I think.
And one more.
Yeah,
And then one more thing as well is talking to the people who have the influence. A lot of community members I know donate to York University or other educational institutions, and oftentimes they're in a position where, because they make these donations, they could have influence, but I don't know if it's always used, for example. Or if you are in a position of authority, or people, or even if you're not, just writing a simple letter or a phone call or doing that type of lobbying and to have that kind of voice, but talking to the people who make the decisions. Like, I've found that very effective on campus, for example, speaking with the administration and being on their side, working together. And who am I? I'm just a student, right? I'm not anybody with influence, so it could be anybody. It doesn't just have to be someone with a position of authority. It can be a student, it can be somebody in the general community.
Right, as long if we know who those donors are. Some of them may be private. And
right.
Most of them are public.
But as well,
are.
Information about the administration at most universities is public information. You can get their email and just send them an email or a letter or anything like that, and it does make a difference.
Well, you guys have done a great job in your capacity as student leaders, and I really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing your thoughts and your insights and ideas with us. So thank you both very much. Adir, you are going to continue with your studies at York University. You're working towards your BA in economics.
Yep.
So good luck with that. And Josee, you have completed your BA at York University, and you're almost. You have one more course, one more course, but you are going on an internship program
with a group called Eagle's Wings
with the
Ministries.
group, which is the group that you went to Israel.
That's right. I went on
and fell in love with Israel last
right.
year. So good luck with that.
Thank you.
Okay, and we'll hope to have you both back sometime. That's all for today's show. Thanks very much for joining us and for your call. We did have a call, and we'll see you next time here on MENSCHlife. I'm David Grossman. Until next time, don't forget to be a mensch. Bye for now.